I am starting to write a more detailed analysis and article on this situation of all these trillions of dollars that are showing up in Europe under very strange circumstances. There was that 15 trillion that is the subject of debate inside Parliament right now. Before that, there was a mysterious multi-trillion dollar grant from something called Foundation X to help Britain pay its bills. Then we're finding out, all these bearer bonds that are showing up that are being seized because they're parts of criminal activity. And what happens is, if these bonds are seized as part of criminal activity, the seizing government gets to put them in their banking system to boost their asset base without a corresponding debt obligation, which would be the normal course of affairs with these bailouts. Because under the private central bank system, bailouts are just new loans. So yeah, they'll put assets in your bank system, but you get a debt obligation to go with it that is always greater than the amount of the assets going to the banking system. So what I am seeing is a very vast covert attempt to recapitalize Europe without putting them onto more debt in order to prevent the triggering of those credit default swaps on Europe's debt currently sold by Wall Street. Because if Europe does collapse, Wall Street will be destroyed. So it looks to me like the federal government decided to start covertly just shipping wealth over there. Gold, bullion, bearer bonds, all the rest of it. Now here's where it gets really ugly. Back during the Nixon administration, all the private gold reserves held by the federal government, and by the way, that gold is the property of the people. It is not owned by the government. It is your gold. But back during the Nixon administration, they ran out of gold to collateralize all the borrowing they were doing even back then. So the fact is there's already a lien, if you will, against the gold in Fort Knox. So these bearer bonds that are payable in gold, these 1934 series bearer bonds that are floating all over Europe, represent a second claim on the same piece of gold. And now all of a sudden, those gold bars with tungsten cores with the hallmarks of Fort Knox on them that have been floating around Europe for the last couple of years, now they start to make sense. The whole private central bank, Federal Reserve, IMF, World Bank, ECB, is running on fiat currency now. Just like back in 1964, when they took the silver out of our coins and they gave us these clad coins, somebody has taken the real gold out of the bullion and put in these clad bullion slugs. And everybody goes on believing they're real money, so the system can keep on ticking. But I'm beginning to understand that the true scale of this fraud by the world's bankers against the people of the planet, we're only just beginning to see how bad it is, how deep it goes. We're seeing, 16 trillion here, 15 trillion there. We're talking about 100 trillion in exposure in the credit default swaps. The government doesn't own the money they're giving to Europe. They're taking it from the American people. Your gold, your real estate, everything that you have or ever worked for is being stripped from you through funny little paperwork games and being used to prop up Europe so that Europe won't collapse and take Wall Street with it. That is how, and the more I look into this, the more and more dimensions we're seeing about it. I'm building a timeline starting with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which was followed by that strange electronic run on the American financial system that everybody claims they don't know where it came from, which is nonsense. Electronic transfers, the source is always known. It has to be in order to validate it's a valid transfer. You're just not being told who did it. I think that was the warning shot from Europe to the U.S. government. You either fix this mess you made, or we're going to take you down. And so the U.S. government has been shoveling your money, your real wealth, at Europe without your knowledge and without your permission, and trying to keep a lid on it, and the lid is starting to come off. And I'm waiting to see what happens in Parliament over this 15 trillion that they're investigating over there. Because if that story goes away real quick, then we'll know that some serious political power is behind whatever this whole massive transfer of trillions of dollars. Can you imagine the corporate media just not really being interested in paying attention to trillions of dollars of wealth moving around the planet at a time when so many Americans are on food stamps? It would seem to me that this kind of a story would be front page news, bigger than Watergate. But the American media has kind of got a ho-hum attitude toward toward it, which I think is telling us that we may be on the right track here. So anyway, it's a lot of money. It's hard to imagine what $1 trillion is. It really is. It's a vast amount of money. I know you and I and probably everybody we know would be happy maybe with a few million. But trillions of dollars. You know, just the idea of a single piece of paper being worth $1 billion in gold. And by the way, those bearer bonds, I don't think they're forged. Why? How could you forge something like that? That's basically a certificate where you can drive up to Fort Knox with a truck, hand them the piece of paper, they got to give you the gold for it. It's a claim check for the gold. You know they're going to be looking at that very closely before they open that vault. That's a stupid thing to forge. I don't think they're forged. I think it's just a cover story to keep the lid on this scandal a little bit more. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. So anyway, moving right along here, we're talking about these bearer bonds that are floating all over Europe, and the claim that the newest ones are all forged, so you don't have to worry about it. It's not a story. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along, move along. It just doesn't make sense. Counterfeiters counterfeit things people will accept without question, without looking at them. $100 bills, maybe. It's definitely, certainly. 20s and 10s, we've got a problem with counterfeit 20s and 10s here in Hawaii right now. You're not going to successfully counterfeit a $1 billion bearer bond because they're all numbered and tracked for obvious reasons. It just doesn't make sense these would be forged. I think they're real. I think they're real.